Christopher is an experienced, innovative, and energetic construction partner practitioner in Portland, Oregon. In 2008, he joined Swinnerton Builders in Hawaii, quickly rising through the company ranks to become chief estimator. More recently, he led the construction of a 156,000 square foot cross-laminated timber office building, currently the largest installation of CLT in the U.S. We're very excited to have Christopher's expertise and welcome him to kick off our second session. Christopher?
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here today from Portland, Oregon. Today, I'm going to talk about risk analysis and scheduling approaches. So our presentation goals today are really simple. We want to identify potential project risks, recommend mitigation tactics so that mass timber projects can be implemented with financial efficiency. In general, contractors see risk all the time, and there's really two responses. The first response is throw some money at it. The second response is come up with a detailed plan of how we're going to mitigate the risk. So today, we want to say that identify what some potential risks are, educate people of what those are so that a detailed plan can be put forward so that we're not just throwing money at risk, but we're throwing a detailed plan to capture risk mitigation. Here's an overview of the learning objectives for today in our presentation, and we'll go through these in more detail. Okay, so financial risk, jurisdictional risk, and schedule risk. These are the three main subject matters today that we're going to discuss. And we'll start with financial risk. So project delivery method. We'll go into details on why that is a risk to the project financially. Purchasing with exchange rates, and purchasing with commodity pricing. So first, our project delivery method really has two different approaches. In the first approach, we have the CMGC, Design Assist, GCCM, design build type of deliveries. Really, we see that as a bunch of partners sitting at a table, joining hands, teamwork together to start to solve problems and plan out the project. Teaming approaches early in the project's design cycle, we really feel is a benefit with mass timber. On the right side, a design bid build approach, really more traditional approach in procurement of projects. We'll talk why there's some not so good things about that type of approach with respect to mass timber buildings. So project delivery matters, but why? First, there's a ton of new products, new lingo, and new things to think about. The detailing effort that's required to go in to make a prefab kit of parts approach for a mass timber building. The manufacturing constraints. Each manufacturer has different setups in their facilities, which then impart different constraints to what they can produce. Fabrication limitations. Each different type of CNC machine does have limitations on fabrication. There's a ton of different hardware out there as well, proprietary hardware or custom hardware. And then finally, fasteners and proper use of fasteners. There's a lot of different fastener types. So the risk here is that there's new and unfamiliar products, and that can lead to not optimizing the design. The goal of partnering is to get educated on what these constraints are, limitations, and proper uses, and gain that technical knowledge and know-how from industry experts to save money on the project and get to an efficient design. If you really think about it in a sense, we've been building with steel and concrete for many, many years, and everybody's very familiar with how to put those systems in place with an optimized design. The first go at a mass timber building, though, we don't have those years and years of lessons learned like we do in those other industries to get to a comparable optimum design. So the goal is get partners on board so that we can get the lessons learned brought to the team and get that first pass of design to be very efficient. Okay, so big question is, can details be fabricated? It was one thing to look at a set of plans in 2 dimensions. It's another thing to start to bring that into 3 dimensions. But looking at how it gets tooled and cut is really important. That's something during the design process to look at the constructability, or rather fabricatability of certain details, and understand, can a CNC machine cut those details, or is it fabricatable? What do we need to do maybe to alter design slightly to make it more efficient and more cost efficient with CNC time? Next, exploding those details and really understand if it can be installed. Are there limitations or issues that cause those details not to be installed efficiently or to cause pain during installation? In a nutshell, if we get to a really well fabricated details in a mass timber building, usually it leads to really easy to install details out in the field. That's the goal. Get to quick install in the field and fabricatable details. So one aspect of why the design assist approach works in reducing project cost is getting to optimize design by making sure that the details of how things come together are well coordinated. So a seamless transition to construction. This picture really says it all. The models really start in this 3D world. We want to be able to seamlessly bring those out to the field and have those be what is constructed out in the field when all is said and done. Risk mitigation strategies is avoid design bid build, hire and use a CM or GC during design for paid pre-con. Spend a little bit of money to save money on the project. And then engage with a mass timber firm during pre-con to optimize system costs. Okay, this is fun. Purchasing, exchange rate effects. We'll go through an example here. This is a recent example pulled actually just the other day of the past 3 months of the exchange rate for the euro to US dollar. So let's assume that we had a bid date of May 15th, 2020. And that bid amount was $1 million, to make the math really simple. And we have to know that that bid amount is not locked unless we do something ahead of time to get that locked. That bid amount is not locked. So it's going to vary with exchange rate if we are procuring product from Europe or Canada, similarly, where there's exchange rate risk. So it takes time to go through bid leveling, to get approvals, to go with the owner and get bids accepted to where we can release product. So let's say in this example that process takes roughly 10 weeks to July 28th. LOI date of July 28th. And then at that point, the purchase price of that bid that was done on May 15th was $1.096 million. That represents a $96,000 increase, or 9.65% increase in material cost. That is substantial. The margins on these projects with contractors and suppliers going at them is not that great. That exchange risk is passed on to ownership contracting teams. So it's a risk for the project. We need to be conscious of that. So how do we be conscious of that? We get ahead of it. We understand that there's exchange rate risk on a project if we're entertaining non-domestic procurement of mass timber materials. We start to look at ways to maybe lock in exchange rate, see where the exchange rate's going and where the forecasts are going with that. The first thing is really being aware of it, coming up with a plan of how to mitigate that risk so you don't get into this position like you see here, where you had a fairly steep increase in exchange rate in a short period of time. Just from May 15th to June 8th, that was substantial, let alone June 8th through the end of July. Okay, purchasing with commodity index effects. This graph actually was just pulled down the other day as well from Random Lengths. And you see over the past few months the same trend. There's the pandemic dip in April and May. So we have the same thing going on. No reason to go through all the details on this, that there's commodity index risk. That needs to be understood. In this case, you see this trend over the past 3 months is very, very different from historically what we would expect. And that's due to some unprecedented times. Regardless, there's always risk in the commodity market. Okay, jurisdictional risk. Code path we'll talk about, code interpretation, limited tested assemblies, permit comments, and field inspections. So we have code. Which code are we going to use for a project? The 2012 IBC, the 2015, the 2018. It all depends on the local state codes, what has been adopted by that code, what modifications to it, and then really how they interpret it. Local code adoption influences what can or can't be done. There are differences with the use of mass timber just from 2012 to 2015 IBC. So it's good to know what the current code is for that jurisdiction and what is allowable. Understand the code path and required variances at inception of project. A really quick anecdote is the 2012 IBC on a type 3A building doesn't allow you to have CLT in the exterior assembly, where the 2015 code does. So in a case in Oregon on a project, we were under the 2012 IBC. One jurisdiction allowed us to use the CLT in the exterior wall and approved a variance, while another city did not allow that. And it's all on that local interpretation of code. So what that means is when each jurisdiction is interpreting codes slightly different, the thing we have to do early on is meet with the authority having jurisdiction, have a pre-app conference, sit down with them, discuss what the project is, what the project goals, what we plan to do, and start talking through it. See how they're going to interpret the code, what they see as risks for them, and then start to come up with a plan of how to mitigate those risks early in design, so those strategies can be put into the design documents. Then document and circulate those meeting minutes to ensure the team's on the same page. This little step of just being proactive with the jurisdiction will reap many, many good benefits, and we highly urge teams to do this. Okay, limited tested assemblies. There are limited tested assemblies. There's a lot. We're not going to list them all here, but we will talk about a few. 2-hour shafts through non-rated and 1-hour rated floors, 2-hour rated timber to timber connections, limitations of tested connections, just loading in kips. So a good example would be 2-hour rated connections. There's a limited number that have been done, attested, and approved. There's certain manufacturers that have gone through and gotten some of their own 2-hour connections tested. But with the new type 4 A, B, and C buildings, which really for exposed members require 2-hour rated connections or better, the easiest way to go about it is having a tested assembly that was load tested under a fire condition. The thing to really understand is it's not just about the minutes that are involved in getting these approvals, it's also about what the loading was on those types of tests. So tested assemblies may be required, and it may actually be more efficient for the project to go and proactively get a certain condition tested. And the mitigation is engage with consultants and system experts to determine what project details require engineering judgments or project-specific testing. This is something that's really important early on in the project, to just try to identify what would ever need to have an engineering judgment or project-specific testing if required. Some projects are on the cutting edge, some aren't. So it's worth just having that discussion early and figuring out what those project risks are, and again, being proactive and getting ahead of it with a plan. Next, I love schedules. It's like my second favorite thing. Schedules are so much fun. So permit comments. It's really important to think that most likely permit submission and the shop drawing process are going to overlap. That's most likely going to happen on a mass timber project. It's important if we think about mass timber as being a prefabricated kit of parts. It's proactive. We need to do shop drawings early in the process after the permit submission is done, but probably we're going to be waiting for jurisdictional approval and permit to be issued. So most jurisdictions will provide early in the review process structural review comments. And it's important that A, put this into the schedule of when that expected date is. Ask the jurisdiction how long it usually takes for their first review to get those comments back. Put that into the schedule, tie it to the logic with the shop drawings, because there will be things that the jurisdiction has marked out in there that they're concerned about that didn't come through at that early meeting. And you want to be able to not have a change in the middle of shop drawings or after they're done or when you start fabrication. So knowing this date and having a plan centered around this date is important. So not only know the date, but put it into the critical path of the schedule so that the logic ties and it makes sense and it's in front of everybody. Okay, next. Just because a building permit's been issued does not mean that it's approved for inspections. So what does this really mean? Approved permits, you know, are one thing, having a building permit and a document set. But when the inspector comes out, they're the last person that stands in front of commissioning that building. And they might view things a little bit differently, have a different code interpretation. So it's really important to, again, be proactive, determine any assemblies that might require an engineering judgment. If there's not specific UL assembly for a wall detail going into a floor slab, for example, you might need to have tested data or an engineering judgment to support that. So get ahead of that, understand which details might require that, and then also be proactive with the inspector. Have a job start meeting with them, sit down, walk through the project, see if there's any red flags that immediately come off the table with them and engage them in the process so that they're your partner. Okay, dokie. Schedule risk. MEPF, penetration incorporation, schedule critical shop drawing dates, adjacent structural systems, manage the RFI process, factory backlog, and OPP. So we'll go into all of this. And then finally, erection, sequencing, and constructability. Early MEPF involvement leads to schedule enhancement. So if we do not engage our MEPF partners early in the project, we can't take full advantage of CNC capabilities for our wood products. Most of these wood products are going to be prefabricated offsite, hardware installed offsite, being cut on a CNC machine to allow the hardware to set in for easy connections in the field, and then brought out to site as a prefabricated kit of parts. That leads to the efficiency in building these structures. You're already there with that piece on the CNC machine. So what is important is to get that MEPF coordination done, mechanical, electrical, plumbing, and fire, that coordination done so that openings can be coordinated to be cut on the CNC machine. The important thing to know is this: there's not really many tools out there designed for someone to sit 13 feet up in the air and core through 8-inch beam, wood beam that with a hole that's 8 or 10 inches big. And when this is on the CNC machine, they use a smaller bit. They can get it dialed in exactly to the diameter needed for that penetration to have the right fireproofing of that penetration. And it's way easier to do on a CNC machine. So the key here is that in getting the MEPF partners into the project early will lead to understanding where all that coordination needs to go, where the holes and penetration needs to go, so that you can take advantage of CNC technology and save time on the back end. And it's a safety hazard and risk. You can keep people off of doing hard work with inefficient tools and have that process be done where it's most efficient on the CNC machine. This is different than concrete construction procurement, where you can do your MEPF coordination much later in the game. So that's why this is so important. It is a different mindset than building a concrete building. We have to bring this up into the project schedule and really understand that. So take advantage of the CNC technology. Get this scheduled. And so when we're speaking of schedule, having a shop drawing schedule that's detailed, that's understood. And at the top of this, we see gray bars. The gray bars are for the design deliverables, the DD phase, the CD phase, the construction administration phase. And then on the hard orange, solid orange are certain submittals. You're going to do a submittal for shop drawings on your slab edge. You're going to do a submittal for the connection detailing and how the hardware comes together. And then another one for your panel layout and detailing. And those connection detailing, panel layout detailing include those MEPF penetrations and sleeving. It is really important that we get that stuff brought in early. This really reiterates the need and desire to have, a partnering approach to these projects, design assist approach where we can bring on trade partners early to help facilitate efficient building out in the field. Modeling of adjacent structural systems. So we don't want to have what happens in this picture happen. This is a picture of a CLT panel having to be field cut to handle and deal with something that wasn't really built per the model. The CLT in this case was built per the structural model, as was the steel, but we have an issue where the concrete wasn't built to that model. And it's harder to get the concrete modeled. For foundations, basements, things like this project, contractors aren't used to coming in and providing that technology all the time. And so having a plan not only to get the adjacent structural system modeled, but also making sure that we're building to that model. That's important to limit waste in the field. What we see here is someone taking the picture, someone cutting, and a few people standing around, and probably a couple other people not in the picture that are equally standing around, and all while we have a panel on the hook. This is definitely the condition that we generally want to avoid. Okay, I promised not many construction details in black and white, so here's, I think, the only one of this presentation. So RFI submission and response timing. The RFI process, there will be RFIs in a timber building, in most any building. And what's important is the RFI generation is usually starting at the highest level when detailing starts in the project. There might be questions about where does the building sit, where does it lie, what are the exact dimensions, and that RFI process needs to be quick and succinct. So a protracted RFI process will lead to delays. It will delay fabrication drawings and development, could push procurement or things to accelerate getting procurement done. So what do? We look the RFI process in the eye, say as a team, let's get through this quickly. Let's not have the 10 to 14 day response time for each individual RFI, but let's come together as a team and ask the RFIs quickly, but then have teaming meetings to go through that scheduled for a 3-week period where you can have a couple meetings per week and just get through the issues really quickly and talk through it as a team and agree on what that path is. Next, factory backlog and other people's projects. So we take care of risk the whole way through for our project. We mitigate risks. We do everything right. And at the end of the day, we are still getting a product that's being manufactured in a facility, and there's other projects ahead of us. And so when it comes time to procure and have a manufacturer on board, it's really important to know what other projects, what other people's projects are in front of us. And there could be a mega project in front of your project, and you really want to know that. What is the risk on that project? Does that project have the risk to be delayed? What happens if it is delayed? What's the contingency plan? What's the mitigation plan? And so understanding what is in the factory's queue before your work is really important. It's a great question to ask of your manufacturing partners when you get down to that time where you're analyzing bids and getting ready to secure a partner. Okay, the last series of slides with about a minute and a half to go. Erection, sequence, and constructability. It is really important to make sure and think through how the building is going to be built and in the order. And in this case, on this building, there's two different subcontractors, the structural steel subcontractor and the CLT installer. So on this building, this panel had to be installed first with a welded hold down that tied into the structural system below. Next, once that was installed, this column and beam could be set and allowed to be set for details down on the foundation. And then once that was set, you could finalize that by putting this infill CLT panel in, and then throwing on these beams on top, and then putting in the CLT panel on the side. So if you think about that, that is quite a series of events going back and forth between two contractors to make the building work. This was on a design bid build job, not on one with design assist procurement. If it was a design assist procurement, the goal would be to come out, see that this coordination thing was going to happen and cause problems, and then find a strategy to mitigate this series of this sequence on the project. Okie dokie. That is all. Chris Evans with Swinnerton Mass Timber. Glad to be here today, and thank you very much for your time.